It was the kind of morning that made Henry question every decision he'd made in the last 5 years. The sky was a dull, uncommitted gray, the kind that threatened rain but never delivered, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and old regrets. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the slow drip of coffee into a chipped mug, the silence of his house pressing in on him like a second skin. The world outside was waking up, but inside, everything felt paused, suspended between what was and what might never be again. Henry had built his life around routines. Wake up at 6, run 3 miles, coffee, black, emails, meetings, numbers that never quite added up to happiness. He was good at being alone, or at least he'd convinced himself he was. The house was too big for one person, but he'd filled it with the kind of furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. He told himself it was practical, that he didn't need warmth, just function. But some mornings, like this one, he wondered if he'd gotten it all wrong. He was halfway through his first cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. It was early, too early for deliveries, too early for neighbors. Henry frowned, set his mug down, and crossed the polished wood floor, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He opened the door, expecting a package, maybe a lost dog, but what he saw instead made him freeze. A woman stood on his porch, hair damp from the mist, eyes wide with something between panic and hope. She was holding a phone in one hand, the other pressed to her chest as if steadying her heart. Behind her, parked crookedly at the edge of his driveway, was a battered minivan. The engine was still running, exhaust curling into the morning air.
"Please," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I need help. My kids, they're trapped in the car. The doors won't open, and I can't—" Her words broke off, swallowed by a sob she tried to hide. Henry's mind snapped into focus. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He just moved, grabbing his phone and keys from the table by the door as he followed her down the steps. The grass was slick beneath his shoes, and he could hear the faint, muffled cries coming from inside the van. "How many?" he asked, already scanning the vehicle for signs of danger. "2," she said, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "My son and daughter. I just stepped out for a second to get something from the trunk, and the door's locked. I don't know how. I tried everything." Henry nodded, crouching beside the driver's side window. Inside, 2 small faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide and scared. The boy looked about 6, the girl maybe 4. Both were crying, their hands pounding weakly on the window. "It's okay," Henry said, his voice steady, calm. "We're going to get you out, okay? Just stay back from the window." He tried the doors, locked as she'd said. He glanced at the woman, saw the way her hands shook, the way she hovered between wanting to help and being afraid to make things worse. "Do you have a spare key?" he asked. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's inside. Everything's inside." Henry looked at the kids again, then at the sky, which was starting to spit rain. He weighed his options. The windows were up, the car was running, but the kids didn't seem in immediate danger, yet. But panic could change that in an instant. "Call 911, he said, handing her his phone. "Tell them what happened. I'm going to try something." She nodded, fumbling with the phone, her fingers clumsy with fear. Henry moved to the back of the van, searching for anything he could use. He found a tire iron in the open trunk, hefted it in his hand. He didn't want to break the window if he didn't have to, but he'd do it if it came to that. He returned to the driver's side, crouched low so the kids could see his face. "Hey, can you hear me?" he called, tapping gently on the glass. The boy nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I need you to move to the other side of the car, okay? Both of you. Go sit on the passenger side as far away from this window as you can." The kids hesitated, but the boy took his sister's hand and pulled her across the seats.
Henry waited until they were clear, then raised the tire iron, ready to smash the window if necessary. But before he could swing, he heard a click. The woman, Amelia, he would learn her name later, had managed to get through to emergency services. The operator had walked her through a sequence with the key fob, something she hadn't tried in her panic. The doors unlocked with a mechanical thunk. Henry dropped the tire iron, relief flooding through him. He yanked the door open, reaching in to pull the kids out, one by one. They clung to him, sobbing, their small bodies shaking with fear and adrenaline. Amelia dropped to her knees beside them, gathering both children into her arms. She was crying now, openly, her relief raw and unfiltered. Henry stepped back, giving them space, his own hands trembling just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him through tears. "Thank you so much. I didn't know what else to do." Henry shook his head, trying to find words that didn't sound hollow. "You did the right thing. You got help." The rain was falling harder now, soaking them all, but none of them seemed to notice. The kids clung to their mother, and Henry stood there, feeling something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd built around his life. He watched as Amelia checked her children over, murmuring reassurances, her hands gentle but thorough. The boy, still sniffling, looked up at Henry with wide, grateful eyes. "Are you a superhero?" he asked, his voice small. Henry smiled, the first real smile in what felt like years. "No, buddy, just a neighbor." The sirens arrived a few minutes later, lights flashing in the gray morning. Paramedics checked the kids, pronounced them shaken but unharmed. The police took statements, asked questions, made notes. Through it all, Henry stayed close, not wanting to leave until he was sure they were all right. When it was over, when the emergency vehicles had gone and the rain had slowed to a drizzle, Amelia turned to him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice soft. Henry shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "You don't have to. I'm just glad they're okay." She smiled, a real, tired smile. "Still, thank you." He nodded, unsure what else to say. The world felt different now, as if something important had shifted, though he couldn't quite name what it was. The rain had eased to a gentle mist, leaving the world washed and quiet. Henry stood awkwardly by the curb, watching as Amelia bundled her children back into the van, this time with the doors wide open and the keys firmly in her hand. The boy, still clutching a faded blue dinosaur, glanced back at Henry with a shy wave. The little girl, her cheeks blotchy from crying, buried her face in her mother's coat. Henry felt the urge to retreat, to slip back into the safety of his silent house and let the morning fade into memory. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way Amelia's hands shook as she buckled her daughter in, or the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Maybe it was the echo of the boy's question, "Are you a superhero?" still ringing in his ears. Or maybe it was just the simple, undeniable fact that for the first time in a long while, he felt needed. Amelia closed the van door and turned to face him. Her hair was plastered to her forehead and her clothes were damp, but there was a steadiness in her eyes now, a quiet resilience that Henry couldn't help but admire. "I'm sorry for all the trouble," she said, her voice low. "I didn't mean to show up like this. I just panicked." Henry shook his head. "You did exactly what you should have. Anyone would have panicked." She offered a small, grateful smile. "I'm Amelia, by the way, and those two are Max and Sophie." "Henry," he replied, extending a hand. She took it, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. For a moment they stood in the soft drizzle, neither quite sure what to say next. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone to make the next move. "Do you live nearby?" Henry asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. Amelia nodded. "Just down the road, actually. We moved in a few weeks ago. I'm still getting used to the neighborhood." Henry tried to picture which house might be hers, but realized he hadn't paid much attention to the comings and goings on his street. He'd always kept to himself, content to let the world spin on without him.
"If you ever need anything," he said, surprising himself with the offer, "I'm usually around. Not much of a superhero, but I can handle a stuck door or two." Amelia laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Henry, really." She glanced back at the van, where Max was pressing his nose to the window, watching them with wide, curious eyes. "I should get them home," she said. "They've had enough excitement for one day." Henry nodded, stepping back to give her space. He watched as she climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away, the van's taillights glowing red in the mist. For a long moment, he stood in the quiet, listening to the soft patter of rain on the pavement. He turned to go back inside, but something made him pause. On the ground, near the curb, half hidden by the wet grass, was a small, pink hair clip. He bent to pick it up, turning it over in his hand. It was shaped like a butterfly, the kind of thing a little girl might treasure. Henry slipped the clip into his pocket, telling himself he'd return it the next time he saw Amelia. But as he stepped back into his house, he realized he was already looking forward to that moment. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine. Henry answered emails, took calls, reviewed spreadsheets. But his mind kept drifting back to the morning, the panic in Amelia's voice, the fear in Max and Sophie's eyes, the relief that had washed over all of them when the doors finally unlocked. He found himself replaying the scene, wondering what might have happened if he hadn't been home, if he hadn't answered the door. That evening, as the sky faded from gray to deep blue, Henry stood at his kitchen window, watching the streetlights flicker on. He could see the faint glow of Amelia's porch light down the road, a small beacon in the gathering dark. He wondered if she was all right, if the kids had calmed down, if she was sitting at her kitchen table, replaying the morning just as he was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the butterfly clip, turning it over in his fingers. It was a simple thing, but it felt like a thread connecting him to something outside himself, something he hadn't realized he was missing. The next morning, Henry woke before his alarm. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt less like peace and more like absence. He made coffee, dressed, and found himself standing by the front door, the hair clip in his hand. He hesitated, unsure if he should go, unsure if Amelia would welcome the intrusion, but the thought of doing nothing felt worse. He walked down the street, the morning air crisp and clean after the rain. Amelia's house was easy to spot, a small, tidy bungalow with a swing set in the yard and a row of potted plants by the steps. He paused at the gate, suddenly nervous. What if she thought he was overstepping? What if she didn't remember him? Before he could talk himself out of it, the front door opened. Amelia stepped onto the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand. She saw him and smiled, a real warm smile that eased his nerves. "Morning, Henry," she called. "What brings you by?" He held up the hair clip, feeling a little foolish. "I think this belongs to Sophie." Amelia's face lit up. "She was looking for that all night. You're a lifesaver." She beckoned him up the steps, and he followed, feeling oddly at home. The porch smelled of coffee and blooming flowers, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from inside. "Come in," Amelia said. "The kids would love to say thank you." Henry hesitated, but she was already holding the door open, her invitation clear. He stepped inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the warm light. The house was small but cozy, filled with the kind of clutter that spoke of real life. Crayons on the table, shoes by the door, a stack of picture books on the couch. Max and Sophie were sitting at the kitchen table, coloring.
When they saw Henry, Max grinned and waved, while Sophie's eyes went wide. "My butterfly!" she cried, scrambling off her chair to snatch the clip from his hand. She hugged it to her chest, then surprised him by wrapping her arms around his waist in a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you, Mr. Henry," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Henry felt something in his chest loosen, a knot he hadn't known was there. He patted her back, awkward but sincere. "You're welcome, Sophie." Amelia watched the exchange with a soft smile. "Can I get you some coffee or tea?" Henry nodded, taking a seat at the table as Amelia poured him a mug. The kids returned to their coloring, occasionally glancing up at him with shy smiles. For a while, they talked about nothing and everything: how long Amelia had lived in the neighborhood, where Henry worked, the best parks for kids, the quirks of old houses. The conversation flowed easily, the kind of effortless back and forth that made the minutes slip by unnoticed. At one point, Max looked up from his drawing. "Are you coming to the picnic, Mr. Henry?" Henry blinked, caught off guard. "Picnic?" Amelia laughed. "There's a neighborhood picnic this weekend. I promised the kids we'd go, but I don't really know anyone yet." Henry hesitated, the old instinct to retreat rising up. But then he saw the hopeful look in Max's eyes, the way Sophie was already drawing a picture of a picnic basket.
"I'd like that," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Amelia's smile widened. "Great, it'll be nice to have a friend there." The word friend hung in the air, warm and unfamiliar. Henry realized he liked the sound of it. They spent the rest of the morning talking, the kids chattering and laughing, the house filled with a kind of easy joy that Henry hadn't felt in years. When he finally stood to leave, Amelia walked him to the door. "Thank you again, Henry," she said, her voice soft, "for everything." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. "Any time, Amelia, really." As he walked back to his house, Henry realized that something had shifted. The world felt a little less empty, a little more possible. He found himself looking forward to the weekend, to the picnic, to whatever might come next. The week passed in a way Henry hadn't experienced in years. Each day he found himself glancing out his window, half expecting to see Amelia's van, or the flash of Max and Sophie's laughter in the yard. He caught himself humming as he made his coffee, a small, unfamiliar tune that seemed to have crept in from the warmth of Amelia's kitchen. The anticipation of the neighborhood picnic grew quietly inside him, a gentle current pulling him forward. On Saturday morning, Henry stood in front of his closet, staring at his shirts as if they held the answer to a question he hadn't dared to ask. He settled on a soft blue button-down, the kind he used to wear before meetings became video calls and his world shrank to the size of his living room. He checked his reflection, smoothed his hair, and laughed at himself. It was just a picnic, he told himself, just neighbors, just kids, just a single mom who'd appeared at his door and changed the shape of his days. The park was already buzzing with life when he arrived. Tables were covered in checkered cloths, and the air was thick with the scent of grilled burgers and fresh cut grass. Children darted between clusters of adults, their laughter rising above the hum of conversation. Henry scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar face, and spotted Amelia near the playground, waving at him with a bright, easy smile. He made his way over, feeling the old nerves flutter in his chest. Amelia was dressed in a simple sundress, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. Max and Sophie were already running wild, their shoes kicked off, their faces flushed with excitement. "You made it," Amelia called, her eyes lighting up as he approached. "Wouldn't miss it," Henry replied, and realized it was true. She handed him a plate piled high with food. "I hope you're hungry." Max insisted on bringing 3 kinds of sandwiches, and Sophie made sure we didn't forget the cookies. Henry grinned, accepting the plate. "I'll try everything."
They found a spot beneath a sprawling oak tree, spreading out a blanket as the kids tumbled onto the grass. For a while, they ate and talked, the conversation easy and unhurried. Amelia told stories about her old neighborhood, about the move, about the challenges of raising 2 kids on her own. Henry listened, drawn in by the quiet strength in her voice, the way she laughed at herself, the way she never complained, even when the stories turned hard. At one point, Max ran over, breathless. "Mr. Henry, will you play soccer with us?" Henry hesitated, glancing at Amelia, but she just smiled and nodded. "Go on, he's been talking about it all morning." Henry stood, brushing crumbs from his pants, and followed Max and a handful of other kids to the open field. The game was chaotic, more laughter than rules, but Henry found himself swept up in the joy of it. He ran, he kicked, he cheered when Sophie scored a goal, her arms thrown wide in triumph. When the game ended, Henry returned to the blanket, breathless and grinning. Amelia handed him a bottle of water, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're a natural," she teased. He laughed, shaking his head. "I haven't played like that in years." She looked at him, her gaze softening. "You're good with them, with kids." Henry shrugged, suddenly shy. "I never had any of my own. Didn't think I'd be much good at it." Amelia's smile was gentle. "You're better than you think." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the kids chase each other through the grass. The sun was warm on Henry's face, and for the first time in a long while, he felt completely present, anchored in the moment. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd began to thin. Parents gathered their children, folding blankets and packing up leftovers. Max and Sophie returned to the blanket, their energy finally spent. "Can Mr. Henry come over for dinner?" Max asked, looking up at his mother with hopeful eyes. Amelia glanced at Henry, her cheeks flushed. "If he wants to." Henry smiled, the answer easy. "I'd like that." They walked home together, the kids skipping ahead, their laughter echoing down the quiet street. Amelia glanced at Henry, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I know it's just a picnic, but it meant a lot, to all of us." Henry shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I should be thanking you. I didn't realize how much I'd missed this, being part of something." Amelia smiled, her eyes shining. "You are part of it, if you want to be." He nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in his chest. Dinner was simple. Spaghetti and meatballs, garlic bread, a salad tossed together with whatever was in the fridge. The kids set the table, arguing over who got to sit next to Henry. Amelia moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her movements graceful and sure. After dinner, they played a board game, the kind with missing pieces and house rules that changed every round. Henry laughed until his sides ached, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. When it was time to go, Sophie clung to his leg, her eyes wide. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Henry crouched down, meeting her gaze. "If it's okay with your mom, I'd love to." Amelia smiled, her answer clear in her eyes. "We'd love to have you." Henry walked home in the cool evening air, his heart full in a way he hadn't known was possible. The house felt different when he stepped inside, less empty, less silent. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the echo of laughter, the memory of Amelia's smile, the warmth of the longing. He realized then that sometimes the door you open for someone else is the same door that lets the light back into your own life. The next morning, Henry woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window, the kind of golden light that made everything feel possible. He lay there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside, and realized he was smiling. The heaviness that had clung to him for so long seemed lighter, as if the laughter and warmth of the day before had swept some of the shadows away. He made coffee, humming the same little tune that had followed him all week, and glanced at his phone. There was a message from Amelia. "We're making pancakes. Max says you have to come or they'll be ruined. No pressure, but Sophie's already set a place for you." Henry laughed, the sound echoing in his empty kitchen, and texted back, "On my way. Tell Max I'll bring the syrup." He walked down the street, the morning air crisp and full of promise. Amelia's house looked brighter somehow, the windows thrown open, the sound of children's laughter spilling out onto the porch. He knocked, but before he could finish, the door swung open and Sophie launched herself into his arms. "You came!" she squealed, her hair wild and her face sticky with flour. "Wouldn't miss it," Henry said, ruffling her hair as Max appeared behind her, brandishing a wooden spoon like a sword. "Mom says you're the pancake expert," Max declared, his eyes shining. Henry grinned. "I don't know about expert, but I do make a mean stack." Amelia appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She smiled at Henry, her eyes soft and bright. "Good morning. Hope you're hungry." They moved into the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of batter and syrup. Henry took over the griddle, flipping pancakes as the kids watched in awe. Amelia poured coffee, her movements easy and familiar, as if they'd done this 100 times before. Breakfast was a happy chaos, pancakes stacked high, syrup dribbling down chins, laughter bouncing off the walls. Henry found himself telling stories from his own childhood, stories he hadn't thought about in years. The kids listened, wide-eyed, and Amelia laughed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. After breakfast, they moved to the backyard, the grass still damp with dew. Max and Sophie raced around the swing set, their shouts ringing through the air. Henry and Amelia sat on the porch steps, mugs in hand, watching the children play. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when words aren't needed. Henry glanced at Amelia, studying the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me be part of this." Amelia looked at him, her expression gentle. "You don't have to thank me, Henry. You showed up when we needed you. You stayed. That means more than you know." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep inside him. "I didn't realize how much I needed it too. I thought I was fine on my own, but I wasn't. Not really." Amelia reached over, her hand finding his. "None of us are, Henry. Not really." They sat like that for a long moment, the world narrowing to the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of children's laughter, the promise of something new. As the day wore on, they played games, built a fort out of blankets and chairs, and made sandwiches for lunch. The kids insisted on a picnic in the living room, and Henry found himself sprawled on the floor, laughing as Sophie tried to feed him a grape. In the afternoon, a storm rolled in, thunder rumbling in the distance. The kids pressed their faces to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Amelia lit candles, the soft glow filling the house with warmth. Henry helped Max build a tower of blocks, while Sophie curled up in Amelia's lap, her thumb in her mouth. The storm raged outside, but inside, everything felt safe, cocooned in the gentle chaos of family. As evening fell, Henry stood at the sink, washing dishes as Amelia dried. The kids were in the living room, their laughter drifting in from the next room. Amelia glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, when I showed up at your door that morning, I was terrified. I thought I've ruined everything, that I'd never get my kids out. But you didn't hesitate. You just helped." Henry shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head. "No, Henry, not everyone would have. You did, and you kept showing up even when you didn't have to." He looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. "I wanted to. I want to." Amelia smiled, her hand brushing his as she set a plate on the counter. "Good, because we want you here too." Later, as the storm faded and the sky cleared, Henry sat with Amelia on the porch, the kids asleep inside. The air was cool and fresh, the world washed clean. Amelia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder.
You know, I used to think I had to do everything on my own, that asking for help was weakness, but you showed me it's okay to lean on someone, that it's okay to let someone in. Henry wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. You let me in, Amelia. You and the kids, you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. She smiled, her eyes shining in the soft light. Maybe we saved each other. They sat in silence, the world quiet around them, the promise of tomorrow hanging in the air. As the days turned into weeks, Henry became a fixture in their lives. He helped with homework, fixed leaky faucets, read bedtime stories. He learned the rhythms of their days, the way Max liked his sandwiches cut, the song Sophie needed to hear before bed, the quiet moments when Amelia would slip her hand into his, grounding them both. The house that had once felt too big, too empty, now echoed with laughter and love. Henry found himself looking forward to each new day, to the chaos and the calm, to the simple joy of belonging. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Max looked up, his eyes serious. "Are you going to stay, Mr. Henry?" Henry glanced at Amelia, her gaze steady and full of hope. He smiled, reaching for her hand. "If you'll have me, I'd like to." Sophie grinned, her face lighting up. "You're our family now." Amelia squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears. "Yes, you are." Henry looked around the table at the faces that had become his world and felt a peace he'd never known. He realized then that sometimes the family you find is the one you choose, the one that chooses you back. And as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Henry knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.